Every year, as February arrives, store shelves fill with red hearts, chocolates, and greeting cards. We have come to know February 14th as Valentine's Day, a time dedicated to love and romance. Many of us believe this tradition stretches back into the ancient mists of time. The popular story often tells of a kind-hearted Roman priest named Valentine. This priest, we are told, defied an emperor's decree that forbade young men from marrying. He secretly performed wedding ceremonies for soldiers, believing that love should not be denied. For this act of romantic rebellion, he was arrested and ultimately executed, becoming a martyr for love itself. It's a beautiful, simple story that fits perfectly with the sentiments of the day. This narrative, however appealing, is more of a modern fairy tale than a historical account. It paints a picture of a single heroic figure standing up for romance against a tyrannical ruler. We imagine him as the patron saint of lovers, a title that seems to have been bestowed upon him by popular culture rather than by ancient texts. The idea that Valentine's Day is a direct descendant of a Roman festival called Lupercalia is another common belief. This festival, held in mid-February, is sometimes described as a sort of ancient matchmaking lottery, the combination of a romantic saint and an ancient pagan festival seems to provide a solid foundation for our modern celebrations. But as we look closer, we find that these foundations are not as solid as they appear. The truth is, the version of Valentine's Day that we celebrate is a beautiful tapestry woven from threads of myth, misunderstanding, and literary invention. The stories we tell each other have been simplified and romanticized over many centuries. They have been shaped to fit the holiday we want rather than the holiday that was. The real history is far more complex and in many ways much more fascinating. It involves not one, but possibly two different men named Valentine, neither of whom had any recorded connection to secret weddings or romantic love. Their stories were about faith and healing, not about pairing up young lovers for a lifetime of happiness. So, where did our modern traditions come from? If Saint Valentine wasn't the patron saint of romance, who was he? And if the holiday didn't grow out of the Lupercalia festival, what are its true roots? To find the answers, we must peel back the layers of legend that have accumulated over nearly 2,000 years. We have to travel back in time, not to a Roman priest performing secret marriages, but to a world where the name Valentine was associated with something entirely different. The journey will take us through historical records, ancient poems, and the changing customs of European society. It's a story that reveals how a day of remembrance for a martyr was transformed into a global celebration of love. The historical record from the 3rd century is sparse, but it points to at least two prominent Christian figures named Valentine who were executed around the same time. The first was a priest in Rome, and the second was a bishop from a town called Terni. The earliest accounts of their lives, written hundreds of years after their deaths, are not love stories. Instead, they are hagiographies, which are stories written to inspire religious faith. The Roman priest Valentine was said to have been imprisoned for his Christian beliefs under Emperor Claudius II. While in jail, he is said to have had a profound effect on his jailer, who had a daughter who was blind. Through his powerful faith and prayers, Valentine miraculously healed the girl's sight. This act of healing, not of matchmaking, was the central part of his story. Astonished by the miracle, the jailer and his entire family converted to Christianity. However, this defiance of the state religion could not go unpunished. When Valentine refused to renounce his faith, he was brutally executed. The story of the second figure, the Bishop of Terni, is strikingly similar. He, too, became famous for healing. A prominent man's son was suffering from a debilitating condition that left him crippled. The bishop, through his faith, was able to heal the boy, leading that family also to convert, like the priest in Rome. The Bishop of Terni was arrested for his actions and ultimately beheaded for refusing to worship the Roman gods. In these original tales, there is no mention of secret weddings or defying an emperor's ban on marriage. The core of four of their legends revolves around their unwavering faith, their miraculous healing powers, and their martyrdom. The idea that Emperor Claudius II had even banned marriage for his soldiers is itself a historical myth with no evidence to support it. The stories of these men were meant to show the power of their Christian faith in a pagan world. They were remembered as martyrs who sacrificed their lives for their beliefs, not for the cause of romantic love. Their Saints' Day, February 14th, was established to honor their sacrifice, a common practice for early Christian martyrs. Furthermore, the popular myth that our Valentine's traditions are a Christianized version of the Roman festival of Lupercalia is also incorrect. This theory became popular in the 18th century, but modern historians have debunked it. Lupercalia, celebrated on February 15th, was a wild and violent ritual. It involved the sacrifice of goats and a dog, after which young men would run through the city, naked or partially clothed, whipping people with strips of animal hide. This was believed to promote fertility, but it had nothing to do with pairing lovers or drawing names from an urn for a love lottery. The connection between the two events was invented much later by writers trying to link Christian holidays to pagan origins. For more than 1,000 years after the death of the Saints Valentine, February 14th was simply a day of religious observance. The link between this specific day and romantic love did not exist. That all changed in the late 14th century, and the person we have to thank for it is not a saint or a pope, but an English poet, Geoffrey Chaucer. Chaucer is one of the most important figures in English literature, famous for writing the Canterbury Tales. It was in another of his works, a long poem called Parlement of Fools, written around 1382, that the first known connection between St. Valentine's Day and romance was made. He was the original myth maker. In the poem, Chaucer creates a vivid scene where a great council of birds gathers together on a special day to choose their mates for the upcoming year. He writes, "For this was on St. Valentine's Day, when every fowl cometh there to choose his mate." In this single, elegant line of poetry planted a seed that would blossom into a worldwide tradition. It is unclear why Chaucer chose this particular day. Some scholars believe that in the 14th century, people considered mid-February to be the very beginning of spring, the time when birds would naturally begin to pair up. By linking this natural event to the feast day of St. Valentine, he created a powerful and enduring new myth. Chaucer's idea was poetic, not historical, but it captured the imagination of the noble courts of Europe. The concept of a special day for lovers, sanctioned by nature and blessed by a saint's name, was incredibly appealing. Other poets and writers of the era began to follow Chaucer's lead, incorporating the theme of Valentine's Day into their own romantic works. The nobility started to see February 14th as a day for expressing affection through poetry and courtly gestures. The association was so new and exciting that it quickly became a fashionable trend among the upper classes of England and France. It was a literary fantasy that slowly began to shape reality. Thus, the romantic holiday we know today was not born from ancient Roman rituals or the actions of a martyred priest. It was invented in the mind of a poet. Chaucer's simple observation about birds choosing their mates on St. Valentine's Day became the spark that ignited a new tradition. And without his Parliament of Fowls, it is very likely that February 14th would have remained just another date on the calendar, a minor feast day for a little-known saint. The power of a good story, especially one about love, proved to be stronger than 1,000 years of history, transforming the day's meaning forever. After Chaucer introduced the romantic concept of Valentine's Day, the tradition slowly began to evolve. In the 15th century, the first known Valentine was written. Charles, the Duke of Orleans, was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and imprisoned in the Tower of London. From his cell, he wrote romantic poems to his wife in France, which he referred to as his Valentines. A few decades later, in 1477, an Englishwoman named Marjorie Bruce wrote a letter to her fiancé, John Paston, calling him her right worshipful and well-beloved Valentine. These early examples show how the literary idea was beginning to enter people's personal lives, transforming from a poetic theme into a real social custom. As the centuries passed, the traditions continued to grow and change. By the Tudor and Stuart eras in England, it became a popular game among the wealthy to draw names from a bowl to determine one's Valentine for the year. This was often followed by the giving of small but sometimes quite lavish gifts. Court records show that even royalty, like Princess Mary Tudor, participated in these draws. The famous 17th century diarist Samuel Pepys wrote about the customs of his time. He noted that people would give gifts like gloves and silk stockings to their chosen Valentines. He also mentioned a belief that your Valentine was the first unmarried person of the opposite sex you happened to see on the morning of February 14th. The practice of exchanging handwritten notes and poems became more widespread in the 18th century. Lovers would painstakingly craft personal messages, often decorated with symbols like hearts and flowers, and this led directly to the birth of the commercial Valentine's card. The oldest surviving printed card dates to 1797. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, factories could mass produce cards. This made them affordable for everyone, not just the wealthy. Companies like the American firm run by Esther Howland, known as the Mother of the Valentine, began creating elaborate cards with lace, ribbons, and colorful pictures, cementing the tradition of card giving that we know today. When we look back at this long and winding history, we see that the real story of Valentine's Day is much more interesting than the simple myth of a romantic priest. It is a story of how a day honoring religious martyrs was completely reinvented by a poet, embraced by nobles, and gradually adopted by all levels of society. It shows how traditions are not always ancient or set in stone. They can be shaped by literature, fashion, and even technology. The holiday we celebrate today, with its cards, chocolates, and flowers, is the result of centuries of cultural evolution. The true origin of Valentine's Day isn't a single event, but a fascinating journey through time.